How's everybody doing? Okay, we are doing part three, sadomasochist relationship. A holler to my boy Bruce Lindstedt and Tiffany, his wife, and his seven lovely children. Yeah, always have a good time with Mr. Brunstead. Shout out to Chelmsford, Massachusetts. And also shout out to Sharice McPhee. Sharice, I didn't forget about you. Did you like your chart? I didn't hear from you in a while. Anyway, I'm happy to hear from you, and I hope to talk to you soon. And we are going to now jump right in because this is a really, doozy. So there's a lot to cover. So we're doing in part three of the sadomasochistic relationship pathology, and we're gonna jump right in, and we're gonna talk now with the sixth part of the sadomasochistic pathology. I gave references about God. I made references about society, and I made references on other elements, and even a reference against nature. You know, the animals, the beasts of the fields. You know, plants. Trees. The sadomasochistic relationship dynamic exists everywhere around us, and in many psychological forms. It seems to be the it's like an oyster, like a pearl. A pearl is a piece of dirt inside of a clam that the clam wants to get rid of. And it's irritated and it throws saliva on it. And saliva on it. And saliva on it to try to scoop it out. Eventually, it suffocates the clam and it dies. But inside it's a beautiful pearl. That's a sadomasochistic relationship right there. So we see an expression of nature, which is what the oyster, the clam that produces the pearl. The reason why it's irritated to spit is to get rid of it, but it can't get rid of it, and eventually it dies, suffocates, and it creates this beautiful pearl, which is priceless and it's worth a lot of money. You know that because it comes from nature. It's beautiful. So this is another area of sadomasochism. Also, what about the millions of crabs that in the Galapagos Islands they foster from the sand after the eggs are laid, and they go in thousands in droves into the ocean, and they're so vulnerable they can be eaten by birds and vultures and even animals in the ocean. That's a sadomasochistic relationship because God created the creation to have a certain particular flow and ecosystem where there's life, death, and then rebirth through death, through being eaten alive, and nature is beautiful, but it's also vicious because it's a cycle of survival. So in nature, we see the same dynamic of survival of the fittest. That's a sadomasochistic relationship dynamic right there, with nature with nature. If you watch National Geographic and you watch these nature shows, you see the sadomasochistic nature of nature in these animals and even in plants and minerals. So it does exist around that. It's not as foreign as some people might think it is. Nah, not really. Now that we have established that, let's discuss, let's go deeper. Let's go deeper and let's discuss why this relationship dynamic is there in the first place. What is it that they have to atone for? That they deserve, that they need this guilt dynamic, this guilt and atone dynamic in which they feel that they deserve pain. Where does that begin in the life of that person, that young person, which will later become an adult that will engage in this type of sadistic sadomasochistic relationship dynamic? What kind of mother did he have? What kind of father did he have? What is the relationship dynamic between the parents of someone that eventually becomes a sadist or a sadomasochist? And this is the stuff in which social work and the health science and mental health fields should be really educating us more on and about. And unfortunately, they don't. So he's going to take an astrologer to do it. So let's discuss then a deeper understanding of the psychological clicks and clanks and quacks of a person that engages in this type of social pathology. Okay, specifically the masochistic orientation to reality. Okay, so already when we're talking about the masochistic orientation to reality, we are now talking about the frame of reference based on that person's sense of reality, which may be normal or abnormal, depending on the social and familial conditioning that took place in that person's childhood. See, this is the place where we have to now begin to make the investigative research to figure out what went wrong in the psychological development of that human being that now is engaging in a sociopathological condition of the worst kind in human relationships, which is the sadomasochistic pathology relationship dynamic. And then once we get to know that, find out ways to heal it, to bring it to a point of balance where the person doesn't continue to be involved in perpetual, continual crisis that fuels this sadomasochistic relationship with himself, with those around him, with society, and even with God, as we covered in the last two parts. So understand that the sadomasochistic orientation to reality will create circumstantial, that's that term again, circumstantial reality that is defined by personal persecution and then proceeds to compulsively sacrifice oneself in a variety of ways. So now that's a powerful phrase right there, and it carries a two-punch blow. Okay, because here we have the person feels that he needs to be persecuted. Persecution is another word for punishment. So he feels that he needs to be punished. So now he has set his psychological orientation to believe that he deserves to be punished. And like I just said in part two, whatever you put in your mind and you entertain it long enough becomes your circumstantial reality. So the masochist sets up in his head that he deserves to be punished and he deserves to be afflicted pain. So now, everywhere he goes, he's going to send off that vibration and he's going to attract, like a shark in the ocean, shark looking for predator, looking for a victim, looking for something to eat, an apex predator. Now he's going to sniff the scent of the masochist who's sending signals that he wants to be punished and persecuted because he deserves it, because he has a persecution complex. Oh, it's deep. Oh, God, it's deep. It goes so much deeper. I'm barely scratching the surface, and I'm doing part three. And I've barely scratched the surface. I'm just organically, like, grains of sand because this is complex. But I have a responsibility to bring this to your attention. This relationship, in order to succeed, is not just based on astrology. There are other rules of engagements and social principles that has to be understood. That is part of the matrix of healthy relationship dynamics. Ooh. Mm. Okay, so what do we have? We have now someone who feels that he needs to be punished. And this punish can come in multiplicity of ways. For example, teen bullying, being bullied in school. What creates a bully? A bully is someone who's a victim and is being bullied at home. So therefore, that dynamic he brings out into the schoolyard and he becomes a bully. I know because I was a bully and I came from an abusive background. So I became that bully. So I understand this dynamic. So, and therefore, because then I hurt other people, knowing that they were innocent, I felt guilty. And therefore, I thought I deserved to be in an abusive relationship because I've abused others that didn't deserve it. And I did it because it made me feel powerful. Because at one point in my life, I was powerless and was abused. This is the number 19 vibration. So I'm sharing that with you personally so you can understand that I know what I'm talking about. Besides having the clinical background, I actually lived that experience. And I had to, because then I can't talk about it to you today. You get to benefit from that because I've experienced that personally. I just don't know it academically. I had to experience it to then be able to talk about it in a way of psychological understanding outside the clinical books, so that we can see within our own selves how we attracted these types of circumstantial realities based on the punishing thoughts that we held about ourselves. And when you hold negative thoughts about yourself, that because you come from an abusive background, it's not your fault. It's just the way that you were supposed to develop an experience. It's for a greater cause that will serve tomorrow. Something that you might not understand today during the process of you going through this abuse. But at the end of the day, God don't give you more than you can bear. And if you survive it, you become a beacon of knowledge, which then you can show and give to others. So every relationship, whether it's pathological, healthy, or unhealthy, at the end of the day becomes valuable because it's something that you can gauge to or from or against, and it will either lead you to the right type of relationship or away from the wrong type of relationship. But either way, you need a reference point, and there are souls that are born, that are soldiers, that are here to go through these experiences so that we can educate and help others transcend it. I'm one of those soldiers, and I'm pretty sure that there are many of you out there doing the same thing in your own special way. But understand what gives rise to this type of relationship dynamic, which can be so unhealthy and so destructive, because the destruction and the unhealthiness begins with the mind of the masochist, where he believes that he's worthless and he believes that he deserves pain, and he believes through the guilt atonement process that because he has guilt and he cannot shake it off, that he deserves to be punished for it, in hopes that that will abate or atone the sin that he has created. Does that really happen? It is a clinical debate in psychology and in psychiatry today. That is still clinical because at the end of the day, there's still not a sufficient cure for narcissism or for sadomasochism. I don't care how many degrees you have. The mental health field still hasn't figured out what gives rise to these individuals or even how to stop it socially. Not understanding that sociology is part of the problem, depending on the philosophy the society employs, which includes certain people and excludes other people. Understand that that in itself is a setup for the sadomasochistic pathology that occurs on a collective level, but also on an individual level. And racism is an example of that. Let that sink in. Racism of religion, like against the Jewish people, or blacks, or Asian, it comes in many words, in many forms. What we did to the Chinese after World War II and put them in concentration camps. That was another pathology which China, believe it or not, to this day has not forgotten. Okay? And I am studying with scholars that talk firsthand about the account. Okay? All right. Don't fuck with me now. Oh no. So this is still going on as quiet as it's kept. It's just a little bit more sophisticated. Okay? Moving along. Okay, number 7. When you're dealing with atonement, okay, when atonement is linked to guilt. Now, let me explain what atonement is. You have the dynamic of guilt and atonement. You have the concept of denial and avoidance, and then you have circumstantial reality. So there's a couple of dynamics here that you have to understand. This is complex. Stay with me, and there's a lot that has to be put together because this is just such a dark, dark aspect of human personality that it has to be discussed very, very carefully, very carefully. Great care to understand the psychological and social pathology of how this begins, and the professionals still haven't figured it out. Mm. And they haven't figured it out because in order to figure this out, It truly begins with the personal history of the individual. And if you look at the personal history of the individual, you're going to see that there's trauma here. And the level of trauma that has occurred will point towards the type of sadomasochistic relationship setup that that person is about to experience in the next 20, 30 years down the road. Okay? And I told you that sadomasochism pathology occurs in many forms. One form in which it occurs on is called the guilt atonement complex. Okay? Where the person feels that, perfect example, you have a child who's 14, 15 years old who's molesting his cousin, girl cousin or boy cousin. Now, he was molested himself. That's how he learned the behavior. It's already sociopathological. But he doesn't know better because he's been molested himself. He was young. So he doesn't psychologically understand the harm that he's causing. The ego and personality of that young boy is not formed enough for him to have understanding of the harm that he's doing. So he's just repeating what was done to him. Okay? It is forgivable for that boy who's doing that because he's not in psychological understanding. The faculties are not there for that boy to understand what he's doing because he was touched and abused that way. So he's going to repeat the same. And if that boy is not stopped in time, he will grow up to be a molester, an abuser, and the people that they kill in prison for being rapists or molesters. So is more the victim, is just as a victim as the person that he's molesting and abusing. That is a sociopathological sadomasochistic relationship that occurred when that boy was abused by that adult, which now he's repeating the same level of abuse. And if this continues and goes unchecked, that boy will grow up to be a young man and then later a man who is going to be in a relationship dynamic where now he's going to attract an abuser that's going to abuse him the same way he abused those little boys or girls, because now there's a disbalance. So now, and the sadist is a predator like the shark in the ocean, sniffing, smelling that blood, looking for that to eat and devour. Or the lion in the fields who moves stealthily. You don't even see the lion moving, the female. Okay? And before you know it, she's tearing you apart. These are predatory behaviors. And understand that these are learned behaviors. And these are predatory behaviors. But understand that in order for you to be a predator, you've got to be a victim first. And that is also a setup of the sadomasochistic pathology. Another form of it. Yes. Yes. So guilt and atonement. So now let's go into a couple of examples how this manifests. Okay. The lives of such individuals will be episodic. People that have a guilt atonement complex. And the behavior that will manifest with that is one that's episodic. Because these people will be living in a state of perpetual crisis. So and therefore they are going to be living an episodic life. Yes. Like living a soap opera life. There is nothing that they will be able to do to stop it. They're already locked into a psychological system of punishment and reward, failure, success, minimal, never growing higher than the success that encountered before, but always stagnant. It's stuck within a wheel within a wheel. So understand that people that engage in a sadomasochistic relationship will be leading episodic lives. Lives that are constantly in flux, constantly moving up and down. There is no psychological rest from the crisis. The crisis is constant and it's perpetual. And we're going to talk why this is. Life will be a succession of crises. Crisis after crisis after crisis. One situation after another. It is exhausting. It will exhaust the ego and the personality. And each crisis will be more intense than the last one. Oh, God. Ooh. You don't understand. You don't understand. I hope you never experience a sadomasochistic relationship dynamic. If you don't put a bullet in your head or jump off the roof of a building, you're good. Because, oh, if you don't commit murder, oh God, it can take you there. It can take you there. What planetary energy, if we had to ascribe a planetary energy to this experience, what planet will you choose? I'll tell you which planet it would be. It would be Pluto. Pluto, the ruler of Scorpio. So people that are involved in sadomasochistic relationships have very strong Plutos on their charts. I'm a Virgo, and I was born with Pluto in Virgo. Yeah, conjunct the Sun and conjunct Uranus in the 12th house. So I lived this experience. Oh, Jesus, did I live this experience. But I was meant to go through it, because then I won't be able to talk about it to you today. And I survived it. There are many that don't survive it. Those are the ones that fall murdered under the hands of their abuser. Thankfully, that wasn't my experience, but it was the experience of many people that did not survive such a relationship dynamic. So today, I feel obligated to discuss it and talk about it. Should anyone be involved in a relationship like this, know what the cues and the symptoms are, and understand that part of the problem is you. Because if you're not right with you, you're going to find an abuser or a sadist that's going to put you to the brink where you'll have to choose the value system of the abuser or that of yourself, which you have been denying most of your life. It forces you to choose. It forces you to grow up. And it forces you to take responsibility. And it'll put a gun to your head should you waver. And that is the sadomasochistic pathology. The individual lives his or own bubble. They live in a bubble, okay, in which he or she cannot break free from. They cannot break free from because they don't understand psychologically that they're in a bubble. Because this is what emotional and psychological trauma does. It shuns the ego. There's no psychological self-awareness of what's happening. Trauma does that. And you could be living in a state of trauma most of your life, not even knowing it, not understanding that what the events that you went through may have affected you in such a way, emotionally or psychologically, that it stunted your growth. That can occur too, and that usually is what occurs when a masochist falls at the hands of a sadist. But then again, the masochist uh, exhibited behaviors and conditions psychologically that called the sadist to it. So and it is the masochist who controls the level of pain that's inflicted by the sadist. That right there is deep too. And then the masochist can flip and turn into the sadist. It doesn't usually happen right away though. This can take years to occur. These are the type of people that they get so much abuse from the sadist that they snap and they either chop you up with an axe or they shoot you multiple times, where the hatred and rage and the way that they kill the person can be seen in the way they're killed. Someone who's been stabbed 38 times 40, 50 times. That's rage. And that is someone who has been severely abused that brought him to that level. And we're done with part 3. We're going to go into part 4. There's still a lot more to cover. Whew.